What's up everyone and welcome back to the World History Channel. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button today. Let's get started. 18 facts about Anne Boleyn's dramatic life. You've probably heard stories about Anne Boleyn, the beautiful woman who persuaded King Henry VIII of England to marry her and leave the Catholic Church. And she was the mother of one of the most renowned monarchs in British history, Elizabeth I. But there's a lot more to Anne than just her personal affairs, many of which were magnified or inaccurately portrayed by those with a political agenda after her death. So, who exactly was Anne Boleyn? The life of Anne Boleyn was anything but boring. Anne was a brilliant, engaging young woman with the best education her family's position at court could provide. She served under many of the royal women in Europe, was known for her wit, and loved all things French. And once she married King Henry VIII, and did anything, absolutely anything, to keep her marriage intact. Anne Boleyn biography might also mention her family's affairs with her husband, her religious fervor, and rumors that her ghost still haunts people. All in all, there are some weird Anne Boleyn facts. Anne's sister was Henry VIII's mistress first. Mary, Anne Boleyn's only sister, was Henry VIII's mistress prior to her sister's arrival. The two sisters worked together for years. Along with Anne, Mary Boleyn once served Henry's sister Mary when she was Queen of France. Unlike Anne, Mary may have become the mistress of the new monarch of France, King Francis, who ascended to the throne once Louis XII died. Francis referred to her as the English mare and the royal mule, but some academics believe that Anne was the intended recipient of these nicknames. But Mary did have relations with her sister's eventual husband, becoming Henry VIII's mistress once she returned to England. She succeeded Bessie Blunt, mother of Henry's only acknowledged illegitimate child, but their affair didn't last beyond a year or so. And despite the other Boleyn girls' embellished claims, Mary's two children were most likely not Henry's, but those of her husband, whom she married around this time. Mary's past with Henry came back to haunt and when the king sought to marry Mistress Boleyn. Technically, by legal standards of the time, trying to marry a woman whose sister he'd seduced was incestuous, so Henry had to seek a papal dispensation. Ironic, considering one of the excuses Henry used to cast off his first wife was that she had been his brother's wife, and may have encouraged her cousin to have sex with her husband. Once they got married, Henry didn't remain fascinated with Anne for long, so he began having more affairs. Anne enlisted her own allies to spy on the king, and even become Henry's mistresses, so he wouldn't favor one of her enemies, who might turn Henry against her. The women Anne convinced to seduce her own husband included one of her cousins, either Margaret or Mary Shelton, daughters of her father's sister. Ultimately, witnessing a relative have an affair with her husband made Anne intensely jealous, and it didn't soften Henry's allegedly terrible treatment of her. A rumor claims her mother also slept with Henry VIII. Anne's fiercest opponents spread a rumor that her eventual husband slept with her mother, Elizabeth Boleyn, Countess of Wiltshire. At least one woman hinted that Henry had sex with 3 Boleyn women, the mother and her 2 daughters. A goldsmith's wife also suggested Anne should be burned because Henry had slept with both her and her mother. And according to an account by Catholic priest Nicholas Sander, who hated the pro-Reformation Queen and Henry's second wife was actually his own daughter by Elizabeth Boleyn. Henry definitely did sleep with both Boleyn sisters, Anne and Mary, but there's little evidence to suggest he had sex with Elizabeth as well. She celebrated her rival's death. The Spanish ambassador to England reported that Anne plotted against Catherine of Aragon, Henry's first wife and the aunt of the Holy Roman Emperor. When Catherine finally died in January 1536, the ambassador recalled and was so happy that she wore yellow, a color of joy, not mourning. Henry shouted in glee that he was finally free of the threat of war from Catherine's nephew, as the king's marriage to Anne could no longer be challenged by his first wife's family. She was crowned using a king's crown. Surprisingly for a consort, when Anne was made queen in 1533, she wore Edward's crown, one of England's most ancient diadems. It was usually reserved for monarchs. When Catherine and Henry were crowned together years before, Henry got to wear Edward's crown, but Catherine only wore one that had belonged to the royal's wife. This crown emphasized that Anne and the child she was carrying at the time of her coronation were the real royal family, further excluding Catherine and her daughter Mary. Regardless, Anne later wore a crown made especially for her. Henry gave Anne a man's title. Before their marriage, Henry made Anne appear noble, in her own right in 1532, more than just a lady by virtue of her father's title as an earl. He appointed her Marquess of Pembroke, a title meant for a man. The wife of a marquess would be a marchioness. Unlike the majority of female nobles, who attained their titles by virtue of their fathers or husbands, and would hold a title in her own right, just like a male lord. It was also important to make Anne a noble because Henry was taking her on an official visit to his rival, Francis I of France. So Anne needed to be of sufficient rank to merit meeting a foreign king and being a consort of the English monarch. She was thus on par with, and outranked many of the male nobles in the kingdom. Henry gave her the most gorgeous jewels in town, even asking his first wife to send back the royal gems, which she refused. Henry ordered a special swordsman for Anne's execution. Once Henry deemed that his second wife should be executed, he hired an expert swordsman from the French territory of Calais to make Anne's death quick and relatively painless. Anne was both happy and dazed before she was killed. One can imagine facing death in such a manner would wreak havoc on anyone's emotions. Apparently, Anne even joked that she might be remembered as Queen and Lackhead after her death. The cheery demeanor served as the only way for Anne to exact a modicum of revenge on her husband. She probably didn't have an extra finger and lots of moles. Reports have lingered that Anne had a sixth finger on one hand and moles all over her body, both of which are sorceress features, and that she was cast in a witchy role late in life to justify her execution. Almost a century after Anne's death, a manuscript supposedly written by Anne's teenage admirer, the poet Thomas Wyatt, appeared. Wyatt's nephew circulated the information published therein, which claimed Anne had the beginnings of a fingernail on one hand, and she had a few moles, a far cry from the more exaggerated features the rumor suggested. Anne was the first cousin of the other wife Henry killed. The first cousin of the other wife Henry killed. Henry VIII killed 2 of his 6 wives. His second and fifth spouses, Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, respectively. But Anne and Catherine had more than just a husband in common. They were first cousins. Anne's mother, Elizabeth Boleyn, was the daughter of Thomas Howard, 2nd Duke of Norfolk. From 2 marriages, the Duke had many children, including Elizabeth and her brother Edmund, who fathered Catherine Howard. Thus, Anne and Catherine were closely related, although the former was about 23 years older than the latter. Both Anne and Catherine were placed directly in Henry's path by their uncle, a cunning politician and the 3rd Duke of Norfolk, also named Thomas Howard. Eager to ally himself with the monarchy even further, the younger Howard also married his own daughter to Henry's illegitimate son, Henry Fitzroy, and was educated in the greatest courts of Europe, and grew up in the most prestigious European courts as a result of her family connections, particularly her father's expertise as a diplomat in Europe. In 1513, she served Margaret of Austria, who governed the Low Countries for her deceased brother Philip. Margaret's neat-taught and diplomatic savvy. The next year, Anne went on to serve her future sister-in-law, Mary Tudor, Queen of France, wife of Louis XII. While there, she became a lifelong Francophile, which was helpful when Anne stayed in France after Louis XII's death to attend the next Queen, Claude. The new King of France, Francis I, was a licentious man and Henry VIII's lifelong rival. But Francis's sister, Marguerite of Angoulême, was one of the most brilliant women of her age, one whom Anne greatly admired. Herself an author, she patronized great writers and thinkers, and Anne once told a French ambassador that, next to giving birth to a son, her greatest desire was to see Marguerite again.